This is Gradowski of WeAreChange.org here in London, England, and in today's video we have a special guest. We have British politician and broadcaster George Galloway, who I think it's fair to say definitely is more favorable of left-wing ideas, but is also for Brexit. And that's why I wanted to ask you, George, a specific question, because I'm looking at the news right now, and as an outsider here, all I'm seeing is Brexit chaos, a botched deal, resignations, the British pound going down. What is happening here in the United Kingdom for the outsider to understand?
Well, you say all that as if it's a bad thing. One of the reasons why I supported Brexit was because it was certain to disrupt the hegemony of a section of our ruling class, which has always been against European entanglement. And historically, the left in Britain was completely against the European Union, and for very good reason. The European Union is built on the foundation of excluding socialist politics. It's not allowed. In fact, it's unlawful. It's unlawful, for example, to run a deficit in your budget. So you can't even be a Keynesian and be in good standing with the European Union. You can't have state preference for your strategic industries. So, for example, we could not say we are determined to keep our own steel industry and therefore we're going to have preference for British steel. You cannot bring into public ownership essential services like railways, for example, without allowing that to go to compulsory competitive tendering, in which case you're likely to be undercut by private interests who will then, once it's too late, require the public purse to bail them out. You cannot have free trading relations negotiated bilaterally with other parts of the world. So, for example, if the EU has sanctions on Russia, we have to have sanctions on Russia too. Even if I was the Prime Minister and wanted great relations with Russia, I'd not be able to, because we would be integrated in the European economy, subject to the rules and laws, moreover, of the European Union. So historically, people like me were always against the European Union. It's only actually in the last couple of decades, sounds a long time to you, but isn't to me, I'm sorry to say, that the left fell in love in Britain with the European Union. So I'm not an aberration. I've stayed in exactly the same place. In 1975, I campaigned alongside our leader then, and now even after his death, Tony Benn. I campaigned for Britain to leave the European Union in 1975. And I campaigned for us to leave it in 2016 with rather more success. So, the British government's falling apart as we speak. By the time we reach our destination in half an hour's time, it may already have fallen apart. The Prime Minister may have been unhorsed. A general election may have become unstoppable. Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, another apostle or disciple rather of Mr. Benn, may be on course to become the British Prime Minister. That's why I say, don't say it as if it's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's such a confusing picture, especially from the outside, trying to understand kind of British politics, the changing of the government, and what is happening here. Because, again, the people here voted for Brexit, and now it looks like they're dragging their feet. Who's responsible for this dragging of the feet? Who's responsible for this kind of infighting, stagnation, and these kind of deals that are not happening? And later on, of course, we're going to get into if it happens or if it won't happen. But who's dragging the feet here, and what's happening here?
Well, the foot dragging is a result of this dichotomy within the ruling class. And I always knew, and indeed said on the record 1,000 times during the referendum campaign, that this hegemony of our ruling class would be severely disrupted, and it has been, because whatever is left of native, patriotic British capital is against the European Union. What has become globalized, supranational capitalism is in favor of the European Union, and that in particular means the finance sector. The banks, including American banks like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, threw millions into the campaign. How's that for interference in other people's elections? To try and get us to stay in the European Union, because, of course, finance capitalism cannot tolerate borders. It abhors borders. It wants an entirely border-free economy. But that's to the disadvantage of the working class, because the working class cannot get to grips with globalized capitalism. It's too big and powerful, but it can on a national level. And therefore, you had an alliance between patriotic working class people who somehow knew that there was something wrong in the way things are. And the only way to get to grips with them was to take back control, because the perception was, correctly, that we had lost control. And they were able to ally to a small section of the British ruling class. And that alliance still holds, and it accounts for the division in the Conservative Party. I predicted over and over again that Brexit would bring about the destruction of the Conservative Party in Britain. And that's not a small achievement, by the way. It's the most successful political party in the whole world. It has, over centuries, ruled this country. And it's about to be destroyed. And that's because of that division. So, as soon as the British people voted, by the way, more people voted for Brexit than have ever voted in Britain for anything at any time. 17.4 million voted to leave the EU. As soon as we had, a full-scale rearguard action moved on to the battlefield, led by Tony Blair and his banker friends, financed, sorry to put it this way, because I know it has other connotations, by George Soros, who put millions, uncountable millions, into wrecking Brexit, stopping it from happening. And you've got an alliance of the deep state, which doesn't want it, a big part of the British ruling class, which doesn't want it, a significant part of the Labour movement, loyal to Tony Blair, which doesn't want it. You've got the broadcasters, the BBC, Sky even, and the deep state in Whitehall. None of them want it. So they've done everything these last 2 years to wreck it. And they may have wrecked it, but if they have wrecked it, the seeds have been sown, and dragon's teeth they are, rather than common or garden seeds. And those dragon's teeth that have been sown, if it is wrecked, will reap a terrible harvest.
I'm very happy you're bringing this up, because this is definitely not the perception that you get from watching the media. You get the total opposite perception. For me, a lot of my kind of left-leaning friends are like, why are you for Brexit? I don't understand. And I keep explaining to them, when I look at the European Union, I just see a big bureaucratic, bankster, corporate-funded, a huge organization that doesn't really care about individuals and people, but cares about themselves. And really, if you look at the bigger picture, what you're kind of thinking is very rare, and that's why I appreciate you sharing it with us. But moving forward from here, especially with people like George Soros and Tony Blair coming together, when two factions like that come together for a cause, you know it can't be good, and you know it's not going to be in the interest of you.
Won't be cheap either.
Yeah, it won't be cheap either. But what's your predictions with Brexit? Will it fail? Will it not fail? How do you see things moving forward in this very complicated political landscape?
Well, there are three possible outcomes to the current stasis. The Prime Minister I'm already discounting, because I think she'll be gone, maybe even gone by the time we get out of this car, certainly gone by the end of the week. I'm dealing her out. There can be a new Conservative Prime Minister, more enthusiastic for Brexit, who will either take Britain out of the European Union without a negotiated deal. Crashing out is the pejorative phrase that's used. I don't myself see it that way. It means that we would have the same relationship to the EU as the rest of the world has, which doesn't seem that cataclysmic if you put it that way. But that's one option. A second option is that the House of Commons will combine all the factions that are against Brexit, will combine and pass a motion requiring a second referendum, a so-called people's vote, as if the 17.4 million who already voted were not people. And a third is, and that's the one I prefer, a general election, so that a new British government can be elected, not appointed, not emerge from the bowels of the Conservative Party, because you know what emerges from bowels. I want a general election so that the people can choose a government, and that government will bring about the exit from the European Union that I'm convinced the majority of people still want. And moreover, let me go further. If you had a referendum like ours, in many European countries, you'd get the same result, which is why the EU has driven such a hard bargain with us. It's, if you'll pardon my French, it's for the discouragement les autres. It's to dissuade others from going down this road, telling others, if you leave the European Union, we'll break you like a butterfly on the wheel. But I don't think that anyone in Europe, apart from the finance capitalists, loves the European Union. Some of them may go along with it for fear of something worse, but nobody really loves it. It is, as you alluded, imagine this, a capitalist Soviet Union, unelected, unresponsive, with its own bureaucracy, taking more and more of the power unto itself, disregarding the interests of ordinary people, disregarding the nationalities that are within the state. It's a nightmare. And most people see it that way. If you had, for example, a referendum in Italy, the Italian people would leave the EU. If you had a referendum in the Netherlands, they might leave. If you had it in Denmark, they might leave. Now, they might leave for a whole range of reasons, some of them not that pleasant, but they definitely vote to leave.
It's a nightmare for everyone else, but a neoliberal wet dream, which needs to be called out. I'm so happy you're calling out, George. Really appreciate your kind of perspective on this. Definitely a total agreement in everything you said. I really appreciate your time. The link to your website and your show will, of course, be in the description below. And if you guys found this video helpful and insightful, share it with your friends and family members. Thank you again for supporting and watching Real Independent Media. Love you guys. Stay tuned for more.